July 15, 2021, and we're here today for a virtual working session on docket 0602. Petition for a special law regarding an act relative to early voting options for City of Boston municipal elections, and docket 0603, petition for a special law regarding an act relative to same-day voter registration for City of Boston municipal elections. Referred to the committee on April 28, 2021. The committee held a hearing on these matters on July 8th of this year. Councilor Arroyo is the sponsor of these dockets in accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including requirement that public bodies conduct their meetings in a public place that is physically accessible. The City Council will be conducting this working session via Zoom. The public may watch this working session via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and live on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It will be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. This working session is being recorded. The summary of the two dockets, docket 0602 would allow early voting options in municipal elections and would establish procedures for early voting. Docket 0603 would allow for same day voter registration, or I believe it's going to be election day voter registration. Thank you for that. And for voting on that, the day again would be on the registration. Section 2 of the proposal establishes standards for proof of residence in 0603. Again, this is a working session and the committee will be reviewing the specific language of the dockets and the proposed changes. So this is going to be very much into the language of both of the home rule petitions to make sure that we are down and agree with not just the goals, but really how we're defining and making sure that we're sending up the best product to the State House when this comes, or at least to my colleagues when this comes for a vote. Joining the committee today on behalf of the administration is Sabina Palmonte, Assistant Registrar from the Boston Elections Department. The committee will also be joined by Tanisha Sullivan, NAACP Boston Branch President, and Cheryl Crawford of Mass Vote, who's the Executive Director. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues in order of arrival. I believe it was Councilor Arroyo, then Councilor Mejia, and then myself for any brief opening remarks. And then I think if you'd like, we'll just go right to the panelists and anybody on the language, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you. So I'm going to keep it really brief. I just appreciate everybody's efforts on this. Thank you, Ms. Clyburn Crawford, for being here. Thank you to Ms. Sullivan when she gets here in terms of making sure that we make our elections as accessible and as available to the people as possible. I think this moves us in a direction. I would love to say we're leading the way, but these are things that other states already do, like a large portion of states. And so it's really just catching up. And I look forward to getting into the work. I think we've sent our red line over. If we haven't, Councilor Edwards, let me know. But I'm looking at a document with our red line changes. So I'll go through all those as we get through it section by section or however you want to do it. Thank you. And thank you everybody for your time.
Councilor Mejia? Might be having some technical difficulties. Councilor Mejia? There we go.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't hear anything.
We can hear you.
If you can hear me, Councilor Edwards, shake your head.
I'm waving and.
Oh, you're waving. Oh, so I can't hear you though. So there's something on my end that is prevent. Say something.
Hi, I'm Councilor Edwards.
No, I'm gonna have to log back on because I can be heard, but I can't hear.
Okay.
I'll come back on.
Okay, thumbs up. We're just gonna go straight to Sabina Palmonte, and then we'll go to Cheryl, and then if Tanisha's on, we'll go to her, and yeah. So Sabina.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the board. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have in regards to early voting, vote by mail, and election day voter registration.
Excellent. And so we'll go to Cheryl. And Councilor Arroyo, did you have an order? Did you want to do 02 or 03 first?
as it's written right now, it's a good question. I think most of my edits are on the election day.
Right.
Voter registration one. So do you want to just start there? Because I don't know how many, if any, edits we have on the second one.
Very tiny on the
Yeah.
second one. Okay,
Yeah, so
we'll
why
do that.
I'm going to start
Okay.
with the election day one.
Perfect. We're going to go first now to Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, and then we'll go right into the language.
Fantastic. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting us in. I am Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, the Executive Director at Mass Vote. I have with me today our policy expert, Alex Salaskis. Thanks for allowing him to join me, but we're happy to discuss further early voting and the merits of early voting and same-day registration with you and to work through the language. So thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and appreciate you holding this session.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with, and if Councilor Mejia joins, we'll just go ahead and drop her in for any opening remarks. But for right now, we're going to go to docket 0203, I believe. This is the one on election day registration.
Counselor 06.
I'm sorry, thank you, 06. Got muted somehow. I don't know why I kept saying that. It's 0603. So if everyone wants to open that up, and we're going to go now to the red line or some suggestions for the language, some changes. So the first thing you'll see in the title, of course, is changing it from an act relative to same to actually election day voter registration. I don't know, Councilor Arroyo, that's a majority of the changes that I see, making it consistent with that. Did you want to explain to people why we felt to go from same day, or why you needed, what's the goal for that, or why we did that?
Yeah, so this has to do with pre-tabulation, and actually, I think the subject matter expert on this is actually Sabino Piemonte, if he's willing to just explain what the differences really are for him and for the election department, if it's a same day voter registration for all of the early voting days, or just a same day voter registration, or rather, to term it correctly, just an election day registration as opposed to a same day voter registration. If Mr. Piemonte, if you could just explain sort of the differences and the impact it would have one way or the other if we did it on the election department for Boston.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Same day would require us to have registrations available after the voter registration deadline at all the early voting sites, which would circumvent us having to do central tabulation on any of these ballots. So changing it from same day to election day, that will allow us to do central tabulation of any ballots that were cast absentee, as written in these 602. Any absentee or early voting ballots to be cast 9 days prior to election day, to alleviate any stress that they may impose on any of our poll workers at the precinct level.
So, and I believe, Councilor Arroyo, the goals that you had for this was really about making sure people, just because of a deadline, arbitrary deadline for pre-registration, who are perfectly fine and could be registered to vote, just weren't excluded from voting on a particular day, on the day of election.
Precisely.
Very well.
So this is not something that's been done in Massachusetts, to my knowledge, yet, but it does exist, I believe, in 20 different states. And what it would do is, right now, there's an arbitrary date, things like 19 days before the election or something like that, where you are, if you don't sign up before that date, so let's say you move to Boston 2 weeks or whatever it is before an election, you go to vote, you live here, you're going to be, whoever's being elected is going to be your representative. You don't get a chance to cast a ballot currently because of this arbitrary cutoff date. And so you essentially are frozen out of a process. Let's say you've lived here for a very long time and you just don't know about this arbitrary deadline, but you haven't registered to vote before, and you go to vote in this election because you are so moved to vote for this candidate or that candidate. That arbitrary deadline would keep you from casting a vote, from being heard. And it really doesn't make any sense to do that. And so this would remove that obligation of signing up to vote or registering to vote at some arbitrary date in advance. You could show up on election day. You can register the same way you would register at any other point in time, same requirements, and then you would be able to cast a vote.
Very well. So looking at section 1, Councilor Mejia's returned. Councilor Mejia, if you'd like to say any brief statements.
No, sorry, I'm having really bad internet issues, but I'm here to listen and participate and chime in when deemed necessary. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Okay, section 1. The suggested edits involve removing several parts several sections of language. Essentially, it would remove parts that say any day during a voting period, and the early voting period set forth in section 25B of chapter 54 of the Massachusetts General Laws. Those are stricken, and what is put in is language for the preliminary or general election. Also, we also strike out a language that says, or by appearing in person at an early voting site in the city of Boston. Again, we're no longer allowing for or wanting early voting sites to be a place for same-day registration. We're trying to streamline this all to election day. So that basically summarizes those red lines. If you look at section 1, number 3, we do the same thing, removing the early voting period, and again, the early voting period in the 1, 2, 3, 4 sections that it appears in section 3. Section 4, we remove the state primary. I think that was just a typo because we're just dealing with municipal elections and within 6 days following the state election, we remove that as well because this again is going to be focused on municipal elections. Section 1, part 7, we remove again the early voting period language. On to section 2. That's it. So that's a summary of the edits. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about the edits or language? The rest of the language is staying the same, correct, Councilor Arroyo?
Yes, I'm obviously all ears if Mr. Camonte or Ms. Clyburn Crawford or I'm sorry, I would have to hear that last name again, Alex, but if Alex has any edits, if anybody has anything, or I don't know if Councilor Mejia is still with us. I see her hand up.
Yes, sorry, I am here. Not sure if you can hear me okay, and I'm sorry that I was cutting in and out. So I'm not sure if we discussed kind of like, the general, always the same conversations around interpretation, translation, kind of like, what does that look like in terms of communicating to the general public about what this means? How are we setting ourselves up for success in ensuring that people who may not know that early or same day voting exists, like what's the game plan for that?
This might be another good question.
For Sabino, right?
Sabino, yeah. We already do some language outreach. Obviously, we could always do much more. But in terms of how that works, Sabino, when there's some election change like this, how would that normally get out there?
But we'd have to definitely do a PSA on something like this here. We are required to do it in the 4 languages, which is English, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. That's what our ballots are translated in. But on an informational piece like this, I'll check with the board to see if we can get some more information out this in more languages other than those 4 that I just mentioned.
And I think on the other, just on this, because it's split up into 2 home rule petitions. The other home rule petition, which is about early voting and mail-in voting, has some outreach language in the HRP about outreach specifically.
Okay.
I was just hoping to ask, so
Alex, before you speak, you want to say your name and your organization?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Alex Salakis, and I'm the Policy and Communications Manager at Mass Vote. So just to clarify, individuals won't be allowed to register or update their registration during the early voting period. It's only on election day.
Yeah, so just to clarify what this would do is if you showed up on the actual date of the primary, which this year is September 14th, you would be able to register and vote that day. If you came to an early voting location, if we get one, if you came to an early voting location the week before, you would not be able to just register and vote on that day at that location. You would have to you would be directed to come on the primary day and vote on that day. Same thing for the general election. If you weren't registered prior to that, you would have to show up on the general election day, which is November 2nd this year, but whatever it is on any given year, and you would then have to register on that day, not during the early voting period.
May I ask why that change was made? Because, obviously if somebody comes out to try and register or vote on the early voting period and they realize they can't, that could deter them and make them not want to come out at all on election day. And also over 10 states, I believe it's 14, allow individuals to register and vote both during the early voting period and on election day. So I think it's something that we have the capability to do. That's just something I'd like a little bit more insight on.
Yeah, and so I just defer to Sabino. I see his hands up on this. I know you just talked about this a little bit, but my understanding is that it creates a number of complications for the election department as currently comprised for pre-voter tabulation, amongst other things. But I think, Sabino, you're probably the best person to speak on this and whether or not that's the kind of change that would make a big difference or a small difference for the election department.
Yeah, so in regards to that, if someone was to change their address at the early voting period, it will not allow us to do any central tabulation until election day. And in the past election in 2020, we tabulated centrally prior to election day, close to 70,000 ballots, which did alleviate a lot of the stress on election day for the poll workers. And a constantly changing voting list will not allow us to do that central tabulation.
So basically, just so you could explain that even just to me, when you say central tabulation, I'm not sure folks who aren't in the election department know exactly what that means. But as I understand it, that means I come in, I vote early. You can now count that vote. Is that basically what you mean? So like if I go vote early, I'm already registered to vote. I put it in the box. You pick it up that night. You count it that next day or whatever, however that works. But if it was same day voter registration, you would have to hold off on counting any ballots until actual election day because you'd have to verify those addresses in a different way. Is that essentially what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay.
And that's according to the special regulations that the Secretary of State had placed in 2020 for central tabulation.
And so basically, if the state were to do something in some later some election bill that was statewide that changed sort of some of those conditions, and perhaps you could do early voter registration?
I can't answer that at this moment. It has to be a little bit of analyzing and figuring out of how we can manage that piece with their help.
And can you just explain, because I went back and forth, Alex, as well on sort of, obviously the ability to register more times would probably mean more engagement. And I don't know if that's even argument. I think the issue that I came across and the reason why we've made this change personally, and I'm happy to hear from folks if they think it was a good change to make or not. But the reason why I personally made that change to this was the election day voter registration allows that if that passed tomorrow, if somehow we got this through there and it went up to the House and they did all of that, it would allow our election department to actually put this in place with sort of minimal fuss, because part of the draw for early voting for the election department is that they can tabulate a percentage of the votes before election day so they don't have that election day rush. So even though it would be more resources, it actually is more functional for them. And the way that it was explained to me was that if we didn't allow for early tabulation, one, it would put a pretty extreme workload on the election department that almost cancels out the benefit for them from an administrative standpoint of early voting, but also could cause situations where we don't have election results in a timely fashion. Is that accurate, Sabino? Did I do a good job sort of summing that up?
Yes, you did.
All right. So then the question just is, to be clear, Alex, the question is then, is that enough of a reason not to do it? And I just think that if we're giving folks, right now there is no flexibility. If we're giving folks the flexibility to show up on election day and get that done while also preserving sort of that administrative help, if you will, or support for the election department for right now, then it's worth doing. But I don't disagree with you that more days to early vote and register would mean more potential voters. I just don't know how many new voters you get that way, as opposed to, so like, it's the amount of new voters that you may get on some of those early voting day registration is that equal to, like, if you're trying to weigh the workload that you're trying to save, if you're trying to weigh the accessibility and the ability to have all these other things move smoothly, is it worth holding that up entirely for that? And I struggled with it myself, but I came to the conclusion that I wanted something that was functional and gave people a chance, because right now we don't even have a way to do it past that deadline. But I'm happy to hear, other folks' concerns and thoughts on that, because I did struggle with that. That wasn't an easy decision, but I came to it based on conversations I had with the election department.
I think that's very fair, and I think you make a lot of good points. I mean, we're trying to implement a policy for an election, for a primary that's less than 2 months away now, which is pretty crazy to think about. So, I mean, to have just election day registration itself would be fantastic. Moving forward, though, it would be kind of good to consider how, if at all, could we try to implement it during the early voting period.
Yeah, and I had ideas on that, right? Like, I don't know why somebody who's registering couldn't just put in a provisional ballot or something that gets set to the side, goes in a different envelope, different way of handling that, where they get set aside, but it doesn't impact all of the ballots. And I don't know what the feasibility of that is at all, because that was one of the solutions that I sort of just came up with, brainstorming how we could get around this. But that was something I thought about, that hopefully at some point somebody figures out, because they've figured it out in 14 other states, right? So it's just a question of how they do it, and trying to figure it out here.
Yeah. Councilor Edwards?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So first, I didn't get to say thank you to Sabina for all his hard work. We really do appreciate everything that you do. So I just kind of want to have a better understanding. I mean, I think about some folks who, for many of folks in the city of Boston who experience high housing instability, there are a lot of folks who move from place to place. I'm just curious about if somebody shows up to a polling site, but they have a new address, like will they be able to register to vote in their new address, and will you have the information in real time to be able to just kind of validate that that registration form? And then I'm also curious about some of the communication as you start thinking about this PSA. There are a lot of folks who don't think that they're eligible to vote. I think it's important for us to kind of like seize this moment, because I've come across a lot of people who say, well, I can't vote because I'm a convicted felon, or whatever the case is, or just a whole bunch of different scenarios. And I'm like, no, you are eligible to vote. So I just think that as people are out trying to cast their ballot, that there is some sort of communication that helps people understand who is. I think it's on the registration form if you are over 18, if you're a U.S. citizen. I think all of that information already exists in the registration form, so you can strike that. But if you could just answer the question about, for people who move from place to place to place, and they go to their last polling site, but they're no longer registered there because they just moved the day before, what kind of concerns would these folks encounter if they try to register to vote the same day that they show up at that polling site?
So just the quick summary of some of our conversation. They would be required to demonstrate that they're able to be registered to vote the same way that they do when they would normally register to vote. And it's exactly for those reasons, Councilor Mejia, that we want to have election day voting, so that a person who did just move into the district for whatever reason, and that they are able to walk in and they see an election and have their voice heard. So that I think, but the eligibility to vote isn't changing with this. They could just all demonstrate it on the same day and vote.
Yeah. So the same way that you might show up to vote, sign up to register to vote right now. So if you are watching this and you haven't registered to vote, go do that. But if you haven't done that right now, and you go to an RMV or you do it online, or however the process you choose to do it is, I carry around election day, sign out forms to get folks registered, election day registration forms. The same forms that you would fill out to do it now, you would do it then. They would just have them available and ready to go. I think the only thing that would get added to it that I was told during the hearing by the election department is that currently there's not an age thing on there. So you have to verify your address and all of those different things, but there's not something that verifies that you're 18 years old. because they never had same day voting. So this would same day registration. So they would have an added section, and as I understand it, and Mr. Piemonte can jump in on this, but my understanding is that it would be the exact same form. It would only add, are you certifying that you are 18 years old today?
It doesn't require to add anything because it does ask for your date of birth. It just requires our poll workers to look at the date of birth and make sure that if it's after a certain date, they are 18 years old.
Okay, so I think we can move on to, as we're now, again, the major changes is to take the original language and go from same day to election day and make that entirely consistent in docket 0603. And there was some edits to that, and we will, provided there's no other concerns with language, we will present this to, we've been joined by Councilor Flynn. 1 second, Councilor Flynn, I'm gonna conclude real quick. Well, at least finish, and then if you had any thoughts on it. But I was gonna say if there was no other language concerns on the election day voting home rule petition, we would present that to the body next week. But Councilor Flynn, please.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and apologize for being late for this important meeting. Councilor Edwards, so I support same-day registration, same-day voting. My question is to Sabino. I represent District 2, as you know. In Chinatown, in my community, many of the seniors that vote at the Wang YMCA, often long lines there. So I'm just trying to figure out, do we have enough election day workers, personnel that are able to handle this? And if we don't, are we going to request money from the mayor's office? Because I think we do need to request money, or to make sure there is money in the budget. And what impact will this have on my seniors? Many of them are immigrants waiting in line, and I don't want to see them discouraged from not voting if there's a line. So how do we factor in all those issues during this same day voting registration, which I support, but I also want to make sure my constituents that are already waiting in line, and they're seniors and they're immigrants, I want to make sure that they're also being heard in this process as well. So what are your thoughts on that, Sabino?
That precinct is one of the larger precincts in the city, and we know that. And with the language barriers that we have there, we are required to staff 6 poll workers at every precinct. And I believe at that precinct itself, we staff close to 12 or 15 people for the purpose of moving in that line as quickly as we can, and to try to assist any of the voter with any needs that they may require.
So as a follow-up, do you have enough personnel to deal with this issue? And if you don't, are you asking us for additional funds? Because I'll support that request, but I have to know if you have enough personnel right now.
We don't have any right now. We're in the process of recruiting for the fall elections, but we're always looking for good, reliable people to act and serve as poll workers across the city. So if you have any, we would definitely push them our way, and we will recruit them, train them, and staff them for election day.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Sabino. My only concern is it's on me as well, is I don't think the city council does enough job, a good job in advocating for the election department during the budget process, myself included. So when we want to expand voting rights, which we support, we need to be consistent in that, in advocating for additional funds for the election department. And I accept responsibility for that as well. Thank you, Sabino, and thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn. So other than those questions, we're going to move on to 0602, and this is regarding early voting. And excuse me, let me just make sure I get it all. This is regarding the early voting and mail-in voting. So that's a little bit longer. in terms of context, but in terms of the actual substantive changes, very, very light touches. So I'm going to summarize them and go through them again. Again, this would allow early voting options in municipal elections and would establish procedures for early voting. This is consistent with what the State House gave to themselves in their election, but did not fail to include the municipalities in this this process that we all saw work wonderfully, safely, and actually we believe was part of increasing the voter turnout. In a pandemic, we had record turnout, and I think that's something to be proud of. And again, I think I speak on behalf of the entire City Council. Thank you so much to the Elections Department, Sabino and Anita, specifically for your work, your leadership, and coming to the hearings and making sure we were prepared. That kind of turnout is huge, and it means that when provided and removing obstacles to voting, people vote overwhelmingly. So this is one of those obstacles we're trying to remove, is to make sure municipalities have the same thing. The State House let theirs expire, but they may bring that back. So Councilor Arroyo, I don't know if you want me to go again through the light touch edits. If you want to summarize what the edits are overall real quick, and then we'll just go through them, that might make more sense.
So these edits mostly, I'm just going to make sure so almost all of these edits are to ensure that it's very clear that we have preliminary elections as well as the general election. And so a lot of it is just the addition of preliminary election language to this. And I will just say that this is not, this is literally, I can understand why some people might be hesitant because of a lot of things people have heard about early voting processes, disinformation about early voting process and mail-in voting. But the reality is all this does is it gives people more access to decide, the people who make decisions about their lives. And I will tell you, one of the reasons that I was led to do this and thought this should have been overdue, frankly, is I remember my own campaigns when I had people who would tell me I'm working a double on election day, I cannot vote. And that's heartbreaking that they can't have their voice heard, whether they were voting for me or somebody else. Nobody should be forced to not participate in democracy because they have to survive and they have to pay their bills and they have these kinds of issues happening. And so if we can make it more accessible for them, the goal is to do that. And as far as these changes go, it's just to ensure that the language is crystal clear, that we have preliminary elections municipally and we have general elections.
The kiddies at BU. Okay, sorry, I'm off mute. My apologies. So then, do you mind if I go through the light touches, Councilor Arroyo, just real quick, where they are?
Fine.
If people want to follow along at home, I'm going to go through a lot of sections where we just add in the word absentee, but I'll just cite where that happens, okay? Consistent with what Councilor Arroyo just said. So again, we go through the, if you want to go to section 2A, we put in the words preliminary. We remove the words declared state of emergency. Section B, we again put in preliminary. This is section 2, section B. Section C, we again put in the word preliminary or municipal election. Section 2, section H, preliminary added before election held. Section 3. Oh, did I forget one? L. Section 2, letter L, we added also in preliminary or election held in Boston. And then such vote occurs not less than, it had 5, we put in 10 business days. Section 3, subsection A, it says the Boston Election Department may open absentee and early voting envelopes. So absentee and was added. Section 3A1, we again added absentee or in front of early voting. Section 3A2, we put in absentee or early voting. Section 3A3, we put in absentee or early voting. Section 3A5, before any ballots can be separated from the inner envelope, they must be recorded on the absentee or early voting list. We also add in, the Boston Election Department must read the name and address of the voter from the affidavit envelope and record it on the voting list, which for absentee voters should have the letters AB already printed next to it, or for early voters should have EB. Again, we're just putting in absentee. And then finally, the election officer shall place a mark beside the name of the voter to indicate the absentee or early voting ballot vote. That was section 5. Section 3A, 5I, or A5, subsection 4. Ballots, again, we include all absentee and early voting ballots. The following section 5, election officers shall open the inner ballot envelope. Section 3A6, if an absentee or early voting, the language is added. In section 7, absentee and early voters. Section 3B, advanced depositing of ballots into a tabulator. We also include absentee there. In section 3B1 sub 3, we include absentee. Sub 3A, we include absentee. All of this is in front of the words early voting. In subsection 3B2 4, 5, we include absentee in front of early voting. In 6, we include absentee and early voting. It was absentee in 5 as well. And then in section 7, no results shall be determined or announced until after the time the polls close on the date of the preliminary or general election. So it was again a matter of consistency, including absentee and preliminary. That's it. So, go ahead, Counselor.
Yeah, that's all of them. They're very, and I'll just say, I want to thank both the Secretary of State's office, their legal department helped put this together, which is why some of these changes are minimal, and also the NAACP Boston President Tanisha Sullivan was helpful and integral in making sure that this got put together. The only thing that had to get changed really was primary and absentee language, and I don't know if Mr. Piemonte has any edits from the Boston Election Department or any suggestions or anybody else, but that's it from me.
I do have a suggestion, if I may.
Of course.
The charter, I believe, specifically labels the election as preliminary municipal election and then municipal election. It's nowhere ever mentioned as a general election.
Okay.
General is usually referred to, if I'm not mistaken, as a state election.
Okay.
So what was the correction for the what we are calling general? You want to have
Municipal election.
municipal.
And that's just to keep the language consistent. Preliminaries and municipals, primaries and generals.
Correct.
State.
Okay.
Can I
So,
just, sorry.
Yep.
So just on that, just for.
Oh, wait. Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry. We've been joined by Tanisha Sullivan from the NAACP. Tanisha, did you want to do an overall something on both of the matters first before you dive in?
Before I dive.
Yeah, so we did discuss the election day, and we went through that.
Yeah.
Changing it from same day to election day. And I'm sorry, I didn't see you come in. And then now we're on the early voting. So if you want to do general on where NAACP is, and then if you can go into the specifics of whatever you would like to talk about.
Sure. Great. No, I appreciate that. Chair Edwards. So, I mean, first and foremost, I definitely want to acknowledge Councillor Arroyo just for his steadfast commitment to helping to ensure free and fair access to the ballot box for all Bostonians in particular, and for really taking this opportunity to advance same-day voter registration registration, early voting, and mail-in balloting. While we recognize that these are advancements that we are pursuing at the state level, we are Boston, and so we need not wait for the state to take action. So I definitely appreciate and want to lift up the leadership of Councilor Arroyo on this effort, and also acknowledge really the partnership of the Boston Elections Department, specifically Sabino Pamonte. I know, every step of the way through the pandemic and even now, you've just been a great partner in this work. And so I want to thank you for your service and partnership. And, as Councilor Arroyo mentioned, on these particular home rule petitions, the Secretary of State's office was also particularly helpful. So a true partnership between both certainly the city and the state, but also bringing in advocacy organizations on this. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Cheryl Clyburn Crawford of Mass Vote in her leadership in this space as well. And of course, we are very fortunate to have her on the NAACP team, of course. So, again, just to thank you, because again, here's an opportunity. We could have just, we could be waiting for the state to act, but the city is taking action. And so we greatly appreciate that. That being said, I did hear the tail end of the same day voter registration conversation. I agree with Councilor Flynn with respect to, making sure that as this moves forward, that we have the appropriate funding levels to ensure that that the policy, that the law can be operationalized, and that all communities across the city, experience the true, the benefit of expanded access. So I definitely agree with that, and want to make sure that from a budgetary standpoint, the funding is there. So appreciate his comments. With respect to early voting and voting by mail, again, this is a no-brainer. At the end of the day, what we saw last year, not just in Boston, but across the Commonwealth and across the country, is that when we, from a structural standpoint, took the opportunity to break down barriers to access, we had more participation from eligible voters. And that's what we need. It's like, why wouldn't we do this? That's when our democracy works best. And so I'm very comfortable with where both of these home rule petitions are, and look forward to getting them up to the State House so that we can get them passed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so we short of just putting in the municipal, right, election instead of having general, we will, yes.
Sorry, I did have a question though. So, but with that distinction that Sabino put on the table with respect to municipal versus general, I just want to make sure, is there any implication from, like, how might that implicate which elections this applies to? Because I think our intention was for it to apply to, any election, whether we're talking about preliminary or we're talking about a preliminary, or we're talking about what we were referring to as a general. If we call it, if we add the language of municipal, does that change which elections it would apply to?
So as I understand it, we're changing the language on primary, because we don't have primaries in municipal elections, preliminaries. So all of that got changed over to preliminary, and where it was absent, we added it so that there would be no doubt. We left in some of those places, now it says preliminary or general, and now we're going to replace the general with municipal, so that it's clear that the preliminary, so it's not an either, it's just clear that it's both. In those
okay, places. Got it. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so unless there's any other questions again about the language or the concept of either ones, please go ahead and raise your hands. But I think we, based off of this, and again, just for people who are watching, Councilor Arroyo has had this reviewed not only by his colleagues at the City Council, but by the Secretary of State's office and also the Boston Elections Department and Illinois CP, as well as Mass Vote. Are there other folks too, Councilor Arroyo, who've also reviewed and I failed to mention?
I think you gave the Elections Department their just due. I would also just say, and I don't know if we're closing out or not, but I just want to also thank you, Madam Chair, for moving this so quickly. It's obviously time sensitive. We had the hearing appropriately. We've had this working session appropriately, and I really do appreciate the pace at which you set this to ensure that we can get this through as quickly as possible from our side. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Flynn, did you just raise your hand?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I apologize.
No problem.
So I guess my question was to Sabino. It was more of a logistics question. If Sabino is still on. Hey, Sabino, I see you there. Sabino, so can you tell me the logistics of this in terms of getting the ballot to the printer, getting everything to the printer, getting everything approved, absentee ballots, or if necessary, but what is the time frame that you need from the City Council in terms of getting your logistics done on your part?
Well, the department is working diligently now to try to have the ballot drawing next Friday. So unofficially, that's the date that we're looking at. Once that's done, the names and in the order that they were placed on the ballot will be sent to the printer. And I'm hoping to have approvals and possibly absentees in our possession by the 30th of July, if not early the following week, so that we can start sending out ballots to all of the absentee requests that we have in our possession, as well as any of the military or overseas residents that have applied already.
Yeah, thank you, Sabina. That was my next question, is overseas ballots, including military personnel. When do you have to mail those ballots out for them to receive it so that they can get it back? And just on a side note, I just sent a letter of support on state legislation relating to this issue to make it easier for overseas personnel to vote basically electronically down the road. But that I guess that's for another discussion. But I just want to know what is the time frame for getting these absentee getting the ballots out to military personnel that might be in a foreign country.
And it's great that you bring this up, and it is time for another discussion on this. For municipal elections, the only way that we can send the ballots out to any overseas or military is through the mail. And that's the purpose of us trying to move as quickly as we can to get this ballot drawing done next week, ballots printed, and as soon as our ballots are received, they will be out in the mail to those folks overseas, military, and any applications that we have for in Boston as well.
Okay, and then my final point, I just wanted to give a little bit of background information. When I served overseas in the military in different countries, I was in a small country called Bahrain, and I was back and forth to the Persian Gulf. But it's almost, Sabino, I know you know this, but it's almost impossible at times for a ballot to catch up with you because you're not permanently in one particular place all the time. And, you know, one day I'd be in Bahrain, the next day I'd be in Saudi Arabia, and a week later I'd be in the Persian Gulf. And they're trying to mail the ballot to me, and it just doesn't make any sense. And then the second point, I was also in Guantanamo. And once the mail is dropped off in Guantanamo, to get that mail to you physically, it can take about 2 weeks. It can take about 3 weeks. Even though it's mailed to a country doesn't mean it's getting to you. It's just frustrating to military personnel that you're almost chasing the mail guy down the road to get to look for the ballot instead of the ballot coming to you. It's a major challenge. And, I just wanted to speak on behalf of overseas people because I understand their frustration because I've been through it before. So maybe it helps a little bit in this conversation.
Well, thank you very much for bringing that perspective. I think it's important to have when we think about who we're including in the obstacles that people already are dealing with. Councilor Mejia? You had your hand raised. It may have been from before. So I apologize if I missed calling on you. Okay. So with that, and with us having gone through the edits and what changes, I think we will, in the committee report, put in the final change, which is to put municipal in there. We will then go ahead and present these for the body next week. Okay. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Thank you, Sabino Pamonte. Thank you, Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, and thank you, Tanisha Sullivan, for coming today. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the space.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.